What if I told you one of the most gifted R&B groups of the 1980s, a band that could make you dance 1 minute and cry the next, wasn't just underappreciated, they were deliberately kept from superstardom? You know the songs, Secret Lovers, Always. Tracks that have been played at weddings, reunions, and slow dances for decades. But the real story behind those love songs isn't romantic at all. Behind the glossy album covers and flawless harmonies was a band trapped in a web of betrayal, power struggles, financial chaos, and record label decisions so baffling you'd think they were designed to fail. This isn't the story you've seen in glossy magazines or old MTV interviews. This is the raw truth of Atlantic Starr, how they rose, how they fell, and how the very people who should have propelled them to the top may have been the ones holding them down. And by the end of this story, you'll never hear those classic ballads the same way again. Close your eyes and imagine it's the mid-1980s. R&B is on fire. Funk grooves dominate the clubs and soul ballads rule the radio. MTV is still young, and artists who get airtime are launched into superstardom. Now picture Atlantic Starr, a tight-knit band in perfectly tailored suits, harmonies so smooth they feel like velvet, and a set list that can switch from high-energy funk to heart-melting slow jams in a heartbeat. On stage, they looked like the complete package, the kind of group destined to join the ranks of Earth, Wind and Fire, or Kool the Gang. Every performance radiated unity, confidence, and charm. But offstage, it was a very different story. That unity was fragile. The confidence masked constant internal battles. And the charm? It was often just a thin layer covering deep resentment and mistrust. What the fans didn't see was that the path to the top was littered with power plays, bad business deals, and broken relationships. The kind that leave scars long after the spotlight fades. Part 1. The Early Years. A Band is Born. Atlantic Starr's story begins in White Plains, New York in the mid-1970s, when three brothers Wayne, David, and Jonathan Lewis decided to turn their shared love of music into something bigger. They weren't just hobbyists. Even in those early days, the Lewis brothers stood out. Wayne had the voice and stage presence, David had the songwriting chops, and Jonathan could hold the rhythm down like a rock. Together, they created a foundation that would become the core of Atlantic Starr for decades. They recruited other talented musicians, people who could match their vision and versatility, and started making a name for themselves in local clubs and on the East Coast circuit. Their sound was a blend of everything they loved: the funk of Parliament, the soul of the Temptations, the polished pop sensibility of the Commodores. By the late 1970s, they had caught the attention of A&M Records. It was a big break, the kind of deal that could take a band from small venues to national stages. And at first, it looked like that's exactly what was going to happen. The first signs of trouble Atlantic Starr's debut album made a splash. It didn't break records, but it put them on the map. Industry insiders saw potential. Fans responded to their mix of danceable tracks and heartfelt ballads. But then came their second album, and with it, the first big red flag. Sales didn't meet the label's expectations. Instead of working with the band to build momentum, A&M decided to shake things up by replacing the production team. For most bands, this might not have been a disaster, but for Atlantic Starr, it disrupted the creative chemistry they were building. New producers meant new directions, new demands, and a loss of the artistic flow they'd been developing since day one. It was the first taste of a pattern that would haunt them. Every time they started gaining momentum, the people in charge would make a decision that knocked them off balance. Still, the band pushed forward. They toured, they wrote, they recorded, and eventually they were preparing to release a song that could change everything, a ballad so powerful it could take them to the top of the charts and cement their place in music history. The problem? Their own record label didn't believe in it. That song was called Secret Lovers, and the way it became a hit in spite of their label's indifference is one of the most shocking and telling chapters in Atlantic Starr's history. Part 2. The Secret Lovers Saga and Label. Neglect. A song the label didn't want. By 1985, Atlantic Starr had built a loyal fan base. They weren't yet in the same league as R&B's megastars, but they had proven they could deliver chart-worthy songs and electrifying live shows. And then they recorded Secret Lovers. On paper, it wasn't the kind of track that screamed hit, at least, not to the label. It was a slow-burning ballad in an era when radio programmers wanted up-tempo dance numbers. Atlantic Starr's previous hits leaned toward funk and groove. This was a delicate, intimate confession of a forbidden romance. The band believed in it. The label? Not so much. A&M Records executives looked at the album's track list and decided Secret Lovers wasn't worth promoting. No major marketing push, no big radio campaign, and as for a music video, forget it. They didn't even allocate a proper budget. For most artists, that would have been the end of the story, a great song buried by industry politics. But Atlantic Starr wasn't about to let it die quietly, taking matters into their own hands. The band came up with their own plan. They would make Secret Lovers the emotional high point of their live shows. Every night, as the set reached its close, the lights would dim, the tempo would slow, and the opening chords of Secret Lovers would glide into the crowd. The audience reaction was immediate and electric. Couples swayed. People sang along, even if they'd never heard the song before. Show after show, the demand grew. Fans started calling radio stations asking for the song. Word of mouth, not label marketing, was pushing Secret Lovers into the public consciousness, and then, almost by accident, it started climbing the charts. An unlikely hit. Within months, Secret Lovers was everywhere. It broke into the top 5 on both the R&B and pop charts, a rare crossover success in an era when genre lines were sharply drawn. It was a vindication for the band. They had proven that their instincts were better than the labels, but it was also a bitter reminder. If Secret Lovers could become a hit with zero official push, what could have happened if the label had believed in it from the start? Instead of celebrating the momentum, A&M seemed almost unprepared for it. There was no big follow-up campaign, no coordinated push to turn this success into superstardom. Atlantic Starr had done the impossible, and the reward was indifference. The DIY music video. To capitalize on the song's organic popularity, the band decided to create a music video without the label's help. The result was low-budget, almost homemade compared to the slick productions of the time, but in a way that made it more authentic. The simplicity matched the song's intimacy, and fans embraced it. Even without flashy sets or high-end cinematography, the video became a staple on late-night music programs and regional TV spots. Still, the lack of professional backing meant it never reached the heavy rotation status on MTV that could have pushed the song and the band into true mainstream dominance. The lesson E and the warning sign. Secret Lovers should have been Atlantic Starr's breakthrough. It was proof they could compete with the best in the industry. It was proof they had crossover appeal, and it was proof they could create timeless music that resonated across genres. But instead of springboarding them into the upper tier of R&B acts, it exposed the cracks in their foundation. The label's hesitation, the lack of coordinated promotion, and the unwillingness to invest in a proven hit, these were warning signs of deeper issues to come. Because if a label won't stand behind you when you hand them a top 5 hit, what happens when the next album cycle begins? The next chapter began with All in the Name of Love, an album that did get label support. This time, the executives seemed ready to push Atlantic Starr into the mainstream. The lead single, Always, would become their biggest hit ever. But the success of Always came at a cost. Behind the smiles on magazine covers and TV appearances, the band was splintering from within, and at the heart of that fracture was a volatile mix of love, loyalty, and betrayal. Part 3, the peak era, Always, mainstream success and brewing conflicts, riding the wave into a new era. By 1987, Atlantic Starr had momentum, hard-earned momentum. Secret Lovers had proven they could break through to a wider audience, even without their label's backing. Now, with their next album, All in the Name of Love, the label seemed determined not to make the same mistake twice. A&M Records rolled out the red carpet. Bigger budgets, more studio time, a promotional plan designed to push the band into the national spotlight. For the first time, Atlantic Starr felt like they were finally getting the industry support they deserved. At the center of this new push was a song that would change everything. Always, the making of Always. Always wasn't just another ballad. It was an anthem. Written with sincerity and crafted for mass appeal, it carried the same emotional weight as Secret Lovers, but wrapped it in a promise of forever love. Barbara Weathers' vocals were flawless, soaring, yet tender, while Wayne Lewis's harmonies gave the track its warmth. The arrangement was elegant but powerful, the kind of song that could fit at both weddings and on the radio's top 40 countdown. When Always was released, the impact was immediate. Number 1 across the board. Within weeks, Always was dominating the charts. It hit number 1 on the R&B charts and the Billboard Hot 100, making Atlantic Starr one of the few R&B groups of the era to truly cross over into pop territory. They were suddenly everywhere, and performing on national television, appearing in magazines, headlining larger venues. Fans from different backgrounds and musical tastes were united by that one song. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed like Atlantic Starr had finally arrived where they belonged, at the top. Behind the scenes, the reality. But behind the curtain, things were far from perfect. The Lewis brothers, Wayne, David, and Jonathan, had always been the backbone of the band, writing the majority of the songs and controlling the creative direction. While that formula had produced hits, it also created tension. Other members felt sidelined creatively and financially. The songwriting credits, and the royalties that came with them, overwhelmingly went to the Lewis brothers. Barbara Weathers, whose voice had become synonymous with the group's success, found herself in an even more complicated position. Not only was she the face and voice of their biggest hits, but she was also in a long-term romantic relationship with Wayne Lewis. On stage, it looked like a dream pairing. Off stage, it was a political powder keg. The money problem. As always dominated the airwaves, Barbara began to notice something alarming. Despite playing to sold-out crowds and scoring a #1 hit, her bank account didn't reflect the success. During a major tour, she was informed by the band's management that her account was empty. Shocked, she hired an independent accountant to review her finances and discovered that earnings from her time with the band had been mishandled. When she brought her findings to the rest of the group instead of support, she was met with disbelief and defensiveness. The trust she had once felt was gone. A band at war with itself. The financial disputes only heightened existing tensions. Members who already felt creatively sidelined now saw money becoming another point of contention. Some felt the Lewis brothers were taking too much control. Others accused management of playing favorites. In this volatile environment, Barbara's relationship with Wayne became another flashpoint. Personal disagreements bled into professional interactions. Arguments that started in private sometimes spilled backstage or even during rehearsals. One particularly heated confrontation between Barbara and David Lewis reportedly ended in a shouting match that left the rest of the band shaken. By the end of the All in the Name of Love tour, Barbara had made her decision. She left Atlantic Starr at the height of their success. Her departure was a devastating blow. She wasn't just the lead singer, she was the voice of the band's biggest hits, the one fans associated most closely with their rise. Losing her meant losing a huge part of their identity. The band tried to put on a brave face, but internally they knew the road ahead would be harder. They were about to find out just how much harder. Replacing Barbara was never going to be easy, but what the band didn't realize was that the problem wasn't just finding a new singer. It was the deeper fault lines within Atlantic Starr itself. Because even with new talent, the same battles over control, money, and direction would keep resurfacing. And in the years ahead, those battles would erode everything they had built. Part 4: Money, Control, and Betrayal. The aftermath of Barbara's departure. The vacuum left behind. When Barbara Weathers walked away from Atlantic Starr, she didn't just leave a gap in the lineup, she left a wound that never fully healed. She was the voice on their two biggest hits, Secret Lovers and Always. Her style and charisma had given the group a distinctive identity that fans instantly recognized. Replacing her was like trying to swap out the face of a brand. No matter how talented the newcomer, the public would always notice. But the band had no choice. The machine had to keep moving, tours were booked, contracts had to be honored, and the Lewis brothers were determined to prove they could survive without her. Financial aftershocks. Privately, Barbara's allegations about financial mismanagement were still echoing. She had publicly kept her reasons for leaving somewhat vague, but insiders knew her departure was fueled by mistrust over how money was being handled. The accusations had made people inside the band uncomfortable. No one wanted to admit just how little they understood the financial side of their career. Who was really getting what cut? Where was the tour money going? And why did some members seem to benefit more than others? It wasn't just Barbara who had concerns. Over time, other members started asking questions too. The answers, when they came, were often vague, sometimes alarmingly so. Control in the hands of few. From the very beginning, Wayne and David Lewis had been the creative drivers of Atlantic Starr. They wrote most of the songs, made the big musical decisions, and handled much of the business direction. On one hand, this focus was what had kept the band so tight in their early years. On the other, it meant that the balance of power was heavily skewed. If you weren't part of the inner circle, your influence and your income could be limited. This created a slow burn resentment. Some members began to feel they were just hired hands, even though they were technically equal parts of the band. In the years to come, those fears would prove justified. Because the next chapter of Atlantic Starr's story wouldn't just be about replacing one singer. It would be about an endless revolving door of members, and how that instability, combined with personal drama inside the Lewis family itself, would drag the band further from the superstardom they had once seemed destined for. Part 5: Money and Control Issues. Power and resentment. By the late 1980s, Atlantic Starr had tasted the highest highs. Always had given them a #1 hit across R&B and pop charts. But success wasn't healing the wounds inside the band, it was widening them. The Lewis brothers, Wayne, David, and Jonathan, were not just performers. They were the architects of the group's sound. They wrote most of the songs, controlled production decisions, and had a significant say in business matters. That kind of centralized power can keep a band focused, but it can also create deep resentment. Other members started to feel more like employees than partners. Money starts talking. The friction intensified when money came into the conversation. In the music business, songwriting credits are more than just lines on an album sleeve. They're paychecks for decades. The more your name appears, the bigger your royalty checks. For Atlantic Starr's non-writing members, that meant watching the Lewis brothers' incomes outpace theirs, even when they were putting in the same hours on stage and in the studio. Behind the scenes, whispers about unfair splits and missing money became common. The Barbara Weathers revelation. Barbara Weathers' discovery during the All in the Name of Love tour that she was essentially broke despite 2 years of heavy touring. hit like a bombshell. Her decision to hire an outside accountant confirmed her fears. Her finances had been mishandled. The specifics were murky, but the damage to trust was crystal clear. When she confronted management and the band, the lack of support from some members only deepened her isolation. By the time she left, it wasn't just a personal loss. It was a public signal that something was very wrong behind the music. If Barbara's exit hurt, what came next would fracture the band's chemistry even more. Because when you mix business disputes with family loyalty, every disagreement feels like a battle you can't win. Part 6. Family dynamics and romantic entanglements. The family advantage, and disadvantage. From day one, the Lewis brothers were the backbone of Atlantic Starr. That family bond brought stability in the early years, but over time, it created a hierarchy that was hard to challenge. If you were on the brothers' side, you had security. If you weren't, it was easy to feel sidelined. The Sharon Bryant era. Sharon Bryant, the group's original female lead, understood this dynamic better than most. She had joined to bring balance and freshness to their sound, but she also saw firsthand how hard it was for non-family members to influence decisions. When she left in the mid-1980s, the official reason was creative differences. But insiders knew the constant push and pull with the brothers' control played a role. Barbara Weathers and Wayne Lewis. Barbara Weathers wasn't just the new voice after Sharon, she was also Wayne Lewis's long-term romantic partner. On paper, it seemed like a power couple situation that could strengthen the group. In reality, it blurred every line between personal and professional life. Band politics grew messier. Some members felt Barbara had an inside track to decisions because of her relationship. Others thought the romance created tension between the brothers themselves. The backstage blow-up. The breaking point came in an explosive backstage confrontation between Barbara and David Lewis. Accounts vary on what exactly sparked it, but the shouting match was loud enough for others to hear. It wasn't just about one argument. It was the culmination of months of built-up resentment. Shortly after, Barbara was gone, and with her departure, the unity of Atlantic Starr cracked in a way that could never be repaired. Now, without their signature voice, the band faced its biggest challenge yet, replacing a star without losing the magic. But what followed wasn't just one replacement. It was a revolving door. Part 7. Decline and lineup changes. Searching for the spark. Finding a new lead singer is never easy, but Atlantic Starr's search became a recurring cycle. Each new vocalist brought talent and promise, but none could fully recapture the chemistry that had made the group special in the Secret Lovers and Always years. Fans remained loyal, but the broader public began to move on. David Lewis leaves. The early 1990s brought another blow. David Lewis, one of the key songwriters and instrumental voices, decided to leave. His reasons weren't about money or music, they were deeply personal. He had embraced a spiritual path and felt that life in a touring band no longer fit with his values. His departure was like removing one of the band's structural beams. They could continue without him, but the foundation felt weaker. Masterpiece and a fleeting comeback. The group managed a brief resurgence with Masterpiece, a hit that showed they still had the ability to connect with audiences, but sustaining that momentum proved impossible. The revolving door. The 1990s became a blur of new members, each joining with hopes of restoring the band's glory. But with every change, the group's identity grew more diluted. By the time they signed with Arista in 1994, the lineup was barely recognizable compared to their peak years. The music was still polished, but the brand, the soul of Atlantic Starr, had eroded. Even so, they weren't ready to give up. The late 90s and early 2000s would see multiple reinvention attempts. But could any of them bring the magic back? Today, Wayne and Jonathan Lewis still tour under the Atlantic Starr name. The music remains timeless for those who remember, but the dream of superstardom is a what-if frozen in history. So the next time Secret Lovers or Always plays, listen closely. Behind the harmony is the sound of resilience, and the echo of a band that could have ruled the world if only they'd been given the chance.